This is experience number 3 in a new experience in the art of living. In this experience, you will learn how to live past 100 years of age productively and the art of complete relaxation. By using this information, you can look forward to a long, healthy, productive life. Listen now to Professor Howard Watrous.
Tonight, we have a fascinating study. It'll be different from any of the other 10 nights completely, as if it were completely out of context. But it is necessary to be a well-developed person. If I were to label the subject for tonight, I would say death is afraid of us. We're going to find out how to live to be 163 years of age productively. First of all, let's take a basic assumption. And this assumption is necessary before we can proceed any further tonight. The assumption is that life is good and that you want to live. And that you want to live to the fullest. And it would appear that this is not very much of an assumption, but it's contrary to almost everybody in our society's views. I've talked to many people about living a long time, and the average person doesn't want to. They have a fear that when they get old, they're going to become like some relatives that they've known. And some of these conditions are pretty decrepit. And if I thought that I had to become like some of the people that I have known who become old, I would be driving race cars too. I would be living it up, and I'd be trying to die while I was still young and had some resemblance of my faculties. But if you could find out a way tonight to live to be 150 and still be productive, well, let's go even further. Let's say you could be in better health than you are tonight. Then would this change your mind? In other words, that would be something different. Now, let's go back to a magazine issued September 1966, and there was a photograph of a man, 125 years of age, riding a horse and roping a steer. Does this sound a little different from what we're used to? The article goes on and describes a man, 162, who's in perfect health, works every day, perfect hearing, perfect eyesight, and he's happy. In other words, he is alive. I would like to tell you tonight that there are approximately, in just the United States and Russia alone, 30,000 people over 100 years of age. In other words, we have a rare group that have learned some secrets, and it's interesting to know that they haven't done a very good job of sharing them. I know every once in a while it's a typical standard article in our newspapers, such and such lives past 100. Everybody reads it to find out the secret, and normally it comes out with some conclusion: he drank wine every morning. Or he had some kind of a cigar or a pipe that he smoked. They're making fun of you is what they're doing. They know what they're doing right, and they're living. And they know everybody who's going to read the paper is going to be dead before long anyway. Let me read an article written by Samuel Ullman that will summarize, I think, what we're going to describe the rest of the evening. Youth is not a time of life. It is a state of mind. We grow old only by deserting our ideals. By the way, in our society, that's between 40 and 50. And we might as well be blunt about it. You look at all the relatives, all the friends you know, what happens between 40 and 50? Well, it would have been nice, but it's impossible. So you readjust to a different kind of life. You are as young as your faith, as old as your doubt, as young as your self-confidence, as old as your fear, as young as your hope, as old as your despair. One thing I think that we should bring out right in the beginning, if you're interested in security, you're not going to live very long. In other words, if security is a part of your life, in other words, if you believe in Social Security, if you believe in a government to take care of you, you should realize that when you make security a goal, that security is a delusion. The grave is what you're headed for. If you're going to live a long time, You are free. And freedom is the opposite of security. Every time I make a move towards security, I'm making a move toward bondage. So we're not showing you tonight how to be secure. In fact, if I knew a word that meant the opposite of security, that's the subject of the evening. That's what we're after tonight. So you see, we don't have a very popular subject. Here's an article, and I read this in the San Francisco Chronicle, June the 22nd, 1967. The name of the gentleman that we're going to actually discuss is called Larry Lewis. Now, Larry Lewis is alive, and he's happy. And I would like for you to know that this morning he ran 6.7 miles around the Golden Gate Park, and he did it at 4 a.m. He's not a stand-around waiter. He lifts 25 cup coffee pots without a quiver of the hand. It's interesting to know that when he was 98, he was in an automobile accident. Now I want to read the actual description of what happened to him. He suffered 11 rib bruises, 4 minor skull fractures, 5 spinal dents, and shock, and was in the hospital 26 days. Now, what do you suppose happens to a normal American in their 60s and 70s when they break one leg? We have an unwritten law. Quit. And if you try, you're a fool, and you should get in your coffin and behave like a good person. Evidently, he doesn't go along with it because he was back before long running 6.7 miles, having a gay old time. He's been examined by his doctors. They're trying to figure out what makes him work. There's nothing wrong with him. He's healthy. He's happy. I think that as we discuss him and as we look at him, let me pass the article around. I think you should look over it, read it. This is a man in his 2nd century, and he's an American, and he's happy, and he doesn't feel like he's peculiar. In other words, what we're trying to do tonight is kind of break in on a few social norms that you have built up as quite sacred. In other words, I'd like for you to visualize tonight there is a better way than the Social Security system. There is a better way to live. And I want to go through tonight 21 steps that if you practice them faithfully, you have every right for a productive life. By the way, this will change your entire outlook because you realize you're already programmed for death. A lot of people, this hasn't come across their mind, but if we wanted to examine your self-image right now, the actual death date is already established. So one of the first things we're going to do tonight is change our self-image. Let me ask you, in your own mind right now, think for just a moment, and you know what time you expect to die. Now, normally we can determine this in another way, too. I can ask you, when did your grandfather die? When did your grandmother die? Then your great-grandparents and your great-great-grandparents, and I think you're beginning to see exactly what I mean. They are within 5 years of each other. You say, well, that's our hereditary stock. I mean, that's the way we live. No, you have already programmed yourself within the same 5-year period. But you've already decided this. And if you program yourself to die at a certain time, you do die at this time. There's no way you can avoid it. Now, if you are programmed to die at a certain time, did you know you are already making plans in your life to meet this deadline? I was giving a seminar in Eugene, and a man came to the seminar, and he was 57. He had already retired. He was preparing for his last few years on Earth. He reoriented himself after hearing these 3 hours and decided that he should start a new profession. If you are 57 and you know you're going to live to 162, could you go back to college? If you've got another 100 years, might you get your PhD or get a medical degree or whatever profession you'd want to go into? In other words, you change your whole attitude on life when you realize you're going to be here for a while. Now, if you're 40 tonight and you know you're going to leave at 60, there's not much use to start anything. In other words, all you really need to do is tread a little bit water a little longer and then leave. And we find that older people tend to move back to apartments where they do not have to have any exercise, such as cutting grass or trimming a hedge. By the way, it's easier to actually fill the vacuum when you leave from an apartment. Very much so. Than if you had a home that would have to be closed and taken care of. Because we can move somebody else in that apartment within a matter of 30 days. In other words, you're not even missed. It's interesting that one man attended the seminar, and this was his first night, by the way, this particular night, and just by coincidence, that very day he had purchased his apartment in a compost pile. Can you imagine the shock that he suffered listening to me for 3 hours? The next day he went over to try to get his money back. And this particular arrangement was you give all your money to them, the apartment is yours for as long as you live, and at the time of death it reverts back to the company. So they wouldn't let him have his money back. They told him it was their apartment. He had his choice. He could live there or live somewhere else. It didn't make any difference to them, but they actually had his money, and that was it. So he wanted to sublease it. In the bylaws, no subleasing. So he uses this apartment for a storage room. In other words, this is like a warehouse for him. He doesn't want to live there because he's afraid that some of the atmosphere will rub off on him. Now, he's gone merrily away on a second career. He's having the time of his life. I suppose he'll stash up another fortune. And this is interesting, too. The people who run these particular homes, are they going to lose money on him? This apartment will be tied up for many years because he's healthy. I think of a study that comes to my mind, and this was taken in one of the coastal cities in California. A fascinating study. They took the people at age 65 who retired, and they run the study on the average length of life. The figure will surprise you. It's 22.5 months. In other words, at 65, when you retire, you have an expectant life of 22.5 months. I was giving this speech for a luncheon one day, a group of professional men, and the MC who had introduced me was a medical doctor. And after my speech, he got up and he says, one thing I'm going to agree with completely with that speech, the 22.5 months. He said, this is almost identically true with my patients. By the way, has Social Security got a system that will trick you into death? Let me explain exactly what I mean. At age 65, and you retire, you're supposed to go on Social Security. But they have a little law that if you're making $1,500 a year, you're not allowed Social Security. By the way, now, whose money is it? It's your own. Now, here's the trick. You have to give up your own money in order to be productive, right? It's hard for people to give up what's rightfully theirs. We believe in ownership so much that they will say, no, I will not. I was going to hire a man to work on the ranch. Everything was working out beautiful, and this man had experience for the very work that I was going to use him for. I thought everything was going to work out perfectly, and what do you suppose happened? Before we got turned around 2 or 3 times, he'd made $1,500. Could he work any more the rest of the year? That was it. He could have made a lot more than $1,500 by working for me, because he would be losing his own Social Security money, which was what he thought rightfully his that he put in all the years. He couldn't do it, so he wouldn't work. Now, I want to tell you what happened to him. This was, by the way, was about July. It was somewhere around November he became sick. And the sickness increased, and by the time January came when he was allowed to make another $1,500, he was not capable of work. Now the sickness has increased and has become more severe, and now he's not capable of any kind of work. He doesn't have to worry about his $1,500 maximum at all. In other words, he's through. Does this help the Social Security fund? Now they have another law. In other words, it wouldn't be right to continue this indefinitely, so they say that when you reach 72, you're so tough they can't kill you anyway. So then they allow you to draw your Social Security and make as much money as you want. But guess what they do with the money you're making? Tax it with Social Security payments. I had a man working for me at the ranch that was in his 70s, and he was able to draw his Social Security and work. Yet I had to pay Social Security on him. This was amusing. What should you do when you reach age 65? Tell the government it was nice giving the money to you, and it's your money, it's not my money, and I'm glad for you to keep it. I would like for you to use it for the poor people who are retiring and will be dead in a few years. But as for me, I'm going to go to work, and I'm going to be productive. Age 66 should be more productive than age 65. And your most productive year on earth should be your last year on earth. If you look at Dr. Albert Schweitzer, his most productive day was his last day. The reason for that is, do I have more experience every day I live longer? Therefore, am I more valuable? Assuming I'm not in my second childhood and I'm not senile. And tonight, if you follow the 21 points that we're going to list, you won't have to worry about senility or second childhood, because you're going to be healthy, robust, and strong. By the way, this gentleman that I told about that worked for me in his 70s, one day he walked up to me and he says, "I can't ride the horse anymore." I said, "What's wrong?" I thought he was hurt. I wanted to know where the pain was. He said, "I just decided a man of my age shouldn't be on a horse." Now you see, we begin by social norms to kill ourselves off. I asked him, "Can you ride?" "Yes." I said, "Will it hurt you in any way?" "No." "Why can't you ride?" "Well, I don't think it's proper." In other words, we're describing a situation where a social norm makes a person feel uncomfortable to break it. Now, this particular norm spells death for you. And by the way, it's interesting to know, if I'm going to give you 21 points tonight to help you avoid an early premature death, will these 21 points normally be against social norms? Because the social norms will be set up to make sure you are through at 65. If you work for an actual business that society controls, what will they do at age 65? Mandatory retirement. Now, you've got to make a choice of your own. You've got to actually go into another career. The secret is that when you retire, you will die. Therefore, we cannot believe in any form of retirement tonight. In other words, when you're going to live to 162, at 162, you're going to be still putting in a good, productive day. In other words, you're going to be happy and you're going to be healthy. All right, let's go with number 1. By the way, as we go through these, I would like for you to compare the length of life of machinery, of equipment with a human being. And the first one is a beautiful illustration. Number 1 is cleanliness. If I bought a new Cadillac tonight and I did not change the oil, how many miles should I expect? I would say somewhere around 20,000 miles. Now, I know that if I change the oil, I'm good for 100,000 miles. I want you to notice now the difference. And by the way, the only reason you change the oil is because at 20,000 you suppose it's burned out. The basic reason is that oil is dirty. In other words, we're saying, do we believe in cleanliness when we come to maintenance? I have a lot of equipment in several companies, and believe me, one of the biggest problems we fight is dirt. If there were no dirt on the face of this earth, we wouldn't have half the breakdowns we have. In other words, we've got to make sure things are clean if they're going to work properly. Now, I know you don't have to worry about the outside of your body because you've got friends and relatives, and you've got plenty of TV commercials that tell you which deodorant to use. But the inside of your physical body has more area than the outside. And this is the area that sometimes is very filthy. Also, the inside of your head has to be clean. We realize that the subject material from last week, we covered the cleanliness of the brain. In other words, you've got to have a clean brain to live a long time. I think the actual expression cleanliness is next to godliness will show you the importance of being clean. And by the way, when I mean cleanliness, also cleanliness as far as your work areas are concerned, as far as your living areas are concerned. In other words, just clean, clean, clean. And you'll not be a fanatic about it. Do not worry about it. In other words, just realize if I'm going to be here for a while, I'm going to have everything spotless. Number 2, good food. We are physically what we put into our mouths, and there's no way you're going to get around it. I realize that America probably has more food than any country in the history of the actual civilizations of the world. But let me tell you that we've got many Americans tonight suffering from malnutrition. Is it possible to eat until you're full, or even fuller than full, miserable, and suffer from malnutrition? Yes, it is. It isn't the volume that we're talking about. I would recommend a good book to read on food, and probably I would take somebody who had a PhD in biochemistry or nutrition. And I'll give you an author to start out with, Adele Davis. She's got several good books. Now, I realize that there are some fanatics that write literature that's sold in health stores. And I think if you're going to live to be 162, you're going to have to be smart enough to separate the carrots from the tops. You're going to have to be able to go into a health store and buy what's good for you, read literature that's good for you, and not associate in any way with any fanaticism that will kill you. There's a lot of fad diets that can actually physically kill you. Now, this food, it's interesting for me, too, to know that several professional people, including medical doctors, have organic gardens. It's also interesting to know that a lot of professional people control their diets right down to, in other words, they are spelled out to each calorie, to the vitamins, the minerals. I'm thinking of one study that was done in a mental institution in Louisiana. They had an overload of patients, so they decided that this would be an ideal time to perform an experiment. So what they did was, when you were committed to this mental institution, for 3 months, all you received was good food, plenty of exercises, group exercises, so you'd have to participate, which included fresh air, and plenty of sleep. At the end of 3 months, 75% were released normal. 25% were kept that had something else wrong with them. By the way, we learned that in grade school, didn't we? To sleep and eat and exercise. In other words, these were Americans that were suffering from malnutrition. Now, we don't have time to go into it, nor is it my field. I do a lot of study on nutrition on my own. I control my own diets, and I would recommend that you do the same for yourself. But it's interesting to know that certain vitamin Bs can stop depression. It's also interesting to know that my little boy can be coughing at 3 o'clock in the morning. I can give him some calcium, and he sleeps just as sound and contented the rest of the night without another cough. I could go on and spend the rest of the night telling you about good foods and what foods will do for you, but this is for you to do. In other words, if you love yourself, will you from now on watch what you put in your mouth? And I'll guarantee you the typical American diet that you buy in a typical grocery store is not sufficient to live to 162. In other words, you'll never make it on this particular diet. In fact, sometimes when I'm on the road, and I have to eat in restaurants, I have to do it for a period of time, I can begin to feel the sluggishness in my own body. And it's a relief to get back on a good diet again and feel freshness, especially the clearness in my head. This is thrilling of what a diet can do for you. The next one, number 3, this is the hardest of the list. More people have come up to me after speeches and told me I can do them all but that one. And I've asked them, well, why can't you do this one? They say, well, this society we're in won't allow that one. In fact, it might take you 3 years to reorganize your schedule in order to do number 3. But if you really want to live, you will. Number 3 is regularity. It's simple. It means what? I eat. I don't care whether it's 3 times, 4 times, or 5 times a day, but it is at an exact time each time. I go to bed at an exact time, and I wake up at an exact time. This is interesting because then every other function of my body that's on an autonomous nervous system, in other words, this means I have 2 types of actions. Number 1 is voluntary action, and number 2 are actions beyond my control, such as my pulse or my elimination. Now, how in the world can you control these other factors? Very simple. All the factors of my body are controlled by cybernetics concepts. The cybernetics principle is actually the way that my autonomous nervous system functions. Now let's go through it real slow so you can understand. If I eat at a certain time every day, then we say the food in my intestines will be at a certain place every day. This means, will I have elimination at a certain time every day? Will this eliminate all of these harsh type laxatives that rip you to shreds? And if you're not using those, the mineral oil that makes you as slick as a sliding board. In other words, you are ruining yourself because you're not programming yourself with regularity. In other words, should you need an alarm clock to wake up in the morning? Definitely not. And when you awake, should you need a cup of coffee to glue you together again? In other words, you should wake up refreshed. And I'll tell you the typical way a person goes through life when they have junked the functions of the autonomous nervous system. Now, what do you suppose we're going to use for a substitute? Pills. And here's the way it works. I wake up in the morning and I'm unglued, so I have a coffee. Then I eat, and I suffer from indigestion. I could pick on millions of products, but go to any drugstore and there'll be a whole section of what I do when I have indigestion. So I pick either a pink bottle or whatever one is your favorite, and I take it. Then I feel sluggish, so then I take a pill to pep me up. That gets me going so great that I feel like it's too much, so I take tranquilizer. Then that slows me down. And then I realize that I'm not digesting my protein anymore, because my stomach doesn't know when to put hydrochloric acid in, because the other night I was supposed to eat, my stomach prepared for the food and it didn't come down. So my stomach's sitting down there and says, boy, he didn't get his animal tonight. So then that prepares me for a fast. And about that time I remember I didn't eat, and I pull in and grab a hamburger and throw it down in 5 seconds. There it sits on my stomach wondering what to do. And so then I take hydrochloric acid pills to dissolve the protein. About 8 o'clock, when I should be able to enjoy myself, I have a horrible headache. And I can't figure out why I'm always having headaches, but do I have something for that? Oh, there's millions of these. In other words, I'm destroying the drugstore, am I not, tonight? Because we're going through the drugstore counter by counter. And then finally, you know, after I've laid there for 3 hours, and I can't figure out why in the world I can't go to sleep, I'm exhausted and I haven't slept for a week. I should be able to sleep, so then do I have more pills that can knock me out? In other words, am I describing a life where you are using pills to control all of the functions that should have been programmed and should be automatic? Now, how long do you think you can live on a pill system? Not very long.